Welcome to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast, brought to you by Stratum. I'm your host, Griffin Hamilton. This is the show where I interview industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights into modern-day facilities management. From hospitality to commercial real estate and everything in between, we'll learn what it really takes to succeed as a facilities manager. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast. Today, I've got Danny Koontz with me. Danny, how are you doing?
I am doing great, sir. How about you?
I am doing well. I am really excited to have you on here today. We were actually introduced through a mutual friend, and the quote they gave me, one of the greatest people to set foot in the facilities world. That was how they described you.
Wow.
So no pressure to live up to that today.
Yeah, no kidding. That's very kind.
Well, as a quick preview, you are the restaurant expert. You've been in the space for over 3 decades. And so we're going to dive into best practices around facilities management, specifically in the restaurant space. I know we've had different folks on from different restaurant chains and groups, and it'll be interesting to have yet another perspective and diving into a little bit more detail on best practices there. But before we get into that good content, why don't you tell the listeners and viewers now who you are and how you got into this space, and I'll throw it on over to you.
Okay. I started, long story, but I'll make it very short, but I started as a sophomore in college at University of Tennessee. I was working at Pizza Hut. I was doing the Friday, Saturday night shift where you get home about 2 or 3 in the morning. It's like, oh, I gotta do something here. And a friend called me and said, do you want to go to work in Ruby Tuesday commissary? I'm like, what is that? They said, well, we cook food and package it, and we cook it in batches, soups and quiche and things like that, and we deliver it to their restaurants. Well, how many do they have? Well, they have 6. Okay. And the good news is you can go to class in the morning, and then you can come here and work in the afternoons after you get out of class. Well, being very young, I asked the $1 million question, which is, do you get paid every Friday? Yes, you do. How good? How good is that? So I said, okay, and I started doing that, and I worked in the warehouse for a while, and they came to me and said, would you like to be the purchasing guy? I'm like, sure. What do you want me to purchase? Equipment and furniture for new locations. Sure. Do you know how? How hard is it? You make a deal, right? I mean, it's not that hard. I got it. So I became the purchasing guy. I do that for a year, and they come back to me and they said, hey, you want to be the facility guy? I'm like, what does that mean? Well, you call people and get things fixed. Oh, okay. I don't do the work, correct? No, you make sure somebody comes in. Okay, great. Once again, I'm your guy. And that's kind of how it started. And I had a 35-year run at Ruby Tuesday, and I was the only director of facilities they ever had. So I guess that's a good thing because they don't know how to compare me to anybody else because there never was anybody else. But there was something really good about being there, that no matter who came through the company as a manager, director, vice president, senior vice president, everybody but the owner and founder was the only person that ever been there longer than me. So I was kind of like, when you came, I was there.
Right.
And no matter how your career moved, I was always there. And I think that provided lots of trust over time because it was a given commodity. Everybody knew who you were. You knew who they were as they came through the system. And over time, you hopefully have worked enough together to develop trust. And I think that was because, again, at some point I had 950 restaurants and a staff of 5 people and nobody in the field. You have to have trust to be able to do that.
No kidding. And so you went from day one that you started, they had 6 different locations, up to, you said 950.
950.
So that is an insane amount of growth that you saw over the years. And I would say I don't want to say you're probably the only person that has ever been in a restaurant chain that's gone from 6 to nearly 1,000. So that must have been quite a wild ride. And you said you were there for 35 years, and I'm sure you went from not knowing what the hell you were doing in facilities to obviously running 1,000. So that's just insanity to think of.
Well, and even with 1,000, sometimes you had problems that you didn't exactly know what the hell to do. But what you learned was kind of trying to be a calm voice when managers or whoever were calling you and they were bugging out because there was a problem. And if your answers were very calm and I got it, I'll take care of it, whether I knew what to do or not when I hung the phone up was a non issue, was to make them calm and let them say, okay, he's got it. Now I'll go back to, doing my job and so on. But you learn to carry your phone prior to phones, beepers, 24 hours a day. If you went to the mailbox, you carried it with you. Wherever you went, it was with you all the time because, somebody's got a problem and they need
Yeah,
help. So,
without a doubt. And so, take a step back again before we go into what you learned over those 35 years. What were you studying at Tennessee?
general
General
business.
business. And growing up, did you have any idea what industry you wanted to get in, or what you wanted to do, or were you just kind of going
Sure.
through life?
I want to be a major league baseball player, but I found out I couldn't hit the curveball. So, at some point your career kind of ends and then you do what all the other people do who are former athletes. You move to softball and I did traveling softball for years. So no, I really had no idea. I came to Ruby Tuesday again because of a friend who just said, hey, you ought to come and work here. And I needed a job, and I didn't want to work weekends all the time. So it was kind of good. And then I saw a company that I learned was growing and very young and a lot of fun actually. You worked really hard, but it was a lot of fun and you learned a lot. And I had really great mentors who really helped me. And then it's like I want to stay. I really enjoyed the purchasing part. I learned the facilities part. Purchasing I loved. I really enjoyed getting in a room and negotiating a deal and stuff like that. But then I learned the facility side because there were always opportunities every day that I could help somebody. I had two tours in distribution along with facilities in food distribution. That's very difficult. It's very hard to win. If you are in charge of the food trucks and you send them early, that's not good because the restaurant's not ready to take the truck and unload it. So you can't make points by showing up early. You can't deliver more food than they ordered. That's not good either. There's no real way to win. I mean, your best day is just deliver what they want. But if it's 4th of July weekend in Daytona Beach and they're getting ready to have a race or whatever it may be and their air conditioning's out and I get it fixed, at least for a short term, I've done something really good. So you had opportunities to help people along. And I think the value of that is I've been gone from Ruby Tuesdays since 2013. There are people who were operations people, managers, directors, and so on, who I talk to this day of, hey, I got a question. How about this or how about that? That's where you kind of realize hopefully you've done
Yeah,
something well.
and good. You're in good luck because I've got plenty of questions for you today. So,
Sure.
and so diving into it, and again focusing on your experience in the restaurant space. What's interesting to me is you mentioned you had 5 people across the 950 stores. So, I imagine that you guys had a very robust vendor network, and you didn't have too much in-house maintenance assistance. Is that true?
Yeah, we had no in-house. I mean, we would have in local markets maybe handyman, but what I really did was I took smaller contractors who did remodels, refurbishes, things like that, and I used their network of people, whether that was their electricians, their plumbers. So I would make a deal with this small regional contractor, and he would have the states of Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and North Carolina. South Carolina, for conversation's sake. And so basically, most things that happened in those particular buildings or whatever, I just went through him and I used his sub network because that was in the days prior to the companies, who do a third party platform and also provide all the vendors. Those people weren't out there. So you're either finding tons and tons of vendors, which gets very difficult to manage, or in my case, I would have 6 or 7 regional contractors and use their network. And the better they performed, the more I added to their plate. The worse they performed, I took states away, or I just took them out altogether. But that was kind of the format that we used up until we became partners with Service Channel.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard that before. I mean, you essentially created your own team. It just happened to be external vendors where you put it on them to have their network of subs to go out there, and they're holding them accountable. And you have one point of contact for, for example, 5 different states, and
Sure.
lifted a lot off of your plate, I would imagine.
Yeah, and you're paying a fee. I mean, obviously there's a
Hmm.
there's a markup that they're going to make on that. But what the trade off is I know who to hold accountable for who's going out there. Nothing's worse than to blindly search the yellow pages and just pick someone and hope that they're good. There's tons of things that can go wrong by using this contractor and his network. I have an accountability piece, and he's trying to grow that because that's a program that as it moved along, that person can reach out to my competitors and say, "This is what I do for Ruby Tuesday, and I would like to do the same for you." So it's an opportunity for them at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, that's interesting. I haven't seen that. And from was that the model from the get go as you guys continued to grow and you took on more and more responsibilities? Was it always outsourced, or did you ever have an internal team?
Um, Pretty much outsourced. My team was split across the country, so they were kind of the first point of contact for these contractors and operations. Prior to that, when we probably had 150 restaurants, we let our directors and our general managers have input in who some of the people were that did work, and then we would support them by working with them. But that became very difficult over time as restaurants got more and more.
Hmm.
And there was a value to making a larger deal with the contractor. In other words, pricing and so on, and making sure that you control. And really, it was a budget piece too, because over time, Ruby Tuesday took the repair and maintenance budget out of the hands of the operators, and that all came to me. Well, if I'm going to control it and I'm the one that's going to live or die by it, I want a strong hand in who's going to be going there, so that I own the process.
And that's a great segue for the next question I had for you around R&M spend. And if you look at facilities management and you dumb it down at the lowest level possible, your main goals are to reduce that spend and make sure that you're enabling your team to run more efficiently, and not have to worry about their equipment or the back end of the day to day, right? And so on the R&M side of that, what are some quick wins? Not necessarily if you have 950 locations, but just for a restaurant in general, what are quick wins that someone could do or could see with some easy implementation of different processes and procedures?
I think 2 or 3 things. I think one, in the restaurant industry, you do a lot of teaching, and you teach. So I think things as simple as, let me do a sheet that tells you 12 things to check before you place a service call. That takes all of 7 minutes. I mean, as simple as, it's a refrigerator. Is it plugged in? You know, it did the breaker flip, whatever it may be. There's 8 or 10, 12 things that you can put on a piece of paper to check. And you get that out to your operations team and you talk to them about the value of that. And that every time they check that list and maybe find something that they could check or do themselves, that's probably a $100, $200 savings that they get.
Hmm.
The other part is to you many times repairs and maintenance is a part of a manager's bonus. You want to get managers to help you control R&M, show them what it does to the money that comes out of their pocket. For instance, you can walk around a restaurant all day long, and there will be every restaurant in the country. Sinks are running, sinks are dripping. It's a given, goes on all the time. You break that down and you show a manager that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 30 days in a month. This is how much that water costs by dripping and running. And then you take a percentage of that and you tell them you're charged part of the utility bill goes against your bonus. This is how much money you leave on the table possibly every month. When you break that down to there, they'll hear you. Hopefully. They're never going to hear you when the utilities are paid by the company and doesn't affect them, doesn't pay attention.
Hmm.
But when it's partly their money, that's where you can get those quick wins because you show them what it does and how it impacts them. And that's one of the ways that you can kind of do that to get a quick win. The other part is teach your vendors when they're in the restaurant with the managers and they're fixing something. Show the managers what caused the problem so that they can stop doing whatever it is. You know, a convection oven looks really good when it's hosed out. The problem is all your controls are now wet and they won't work. So that may sound really good to do it with a hose, but it's killer.
Hmm.
But if you ever see that, you have to teach why. You can't just say, don't do that. Here's why. Here's what happens. So teaching is a big part and showing them and helping the managers maximize their opportunities to make money while also lowering your R&M.
Yeah, and it's a great point because what's in it for me? That's the classic line. That
Sure.
it might not be front of mind for a lot of people. They might not go out and blatantly say, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. What's in it for me?" But at the end of the day, it resonates with people when it does come out of their personal accounts and their checks and bonuses. And so, being able to your point, highlight exactly what's in it for them, either financially or just from a time perspective, is really important to get buy-in. And that buy-in at that level will then trickle down to every single level because there's motivation there, right?
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, as far as those are great short-term best practices to implement there. Long term, what do you see as if you were to go in as a consultant for a 10-unit restaurant, for example, and the first thing you would recommend for a long-term best practice would be what?
Make sure you have PM contracts in place. And whatever you do, don't kill them. When budgets are cut, it's the very first thing that goes away. And it goes away because people don't understand it. To this day, you will get calls from people that say, I don't understand why this broke. I just had PMs done a week ago. Well, I equate that to your car. I just took my car in for an oil change too, so why did something break? Because the oil change really has nothing to do with what happened to break on my car.
Mm-hmm.
The PM really has nothing to do with, in most cases, what caused the equipment to break a week later. But the perception is one ties into the other, and preventive maintenance stops breakage. No, it doesn't. What you hopefully do is by doing preventive maintenance and do it on a basis that continues over and over, you give your equipment the best chance to succeed and live the life of that particular piece of equipment that it's supposed to. And hopefully beyond that, fryers. Always looked at fryers as 7 years. If I did PM and I did the things I should be doing and we cleaned them as we're supposed to and boiled them out and did all the things we should, I might get 10 years. 7's the average, but I might get 10. If I don't do PM, I'm going to get 5. So how do I do that and keep it going? But people, when they are in budget crunches, the very first thing they do is we will kill PMs and we'll bring them back. No, they don't. And when you do bring them back, if that is the case, way down the road, you're going to spend much more money to get them back into decent shape than what you could have spent by continuing. So that's one. The other thing, maybe for a 10-unit chain, probably their R&M budget has been set on what did we spend the year before, and we add a percentage to it, and that becomes our budget. But there's no real deep dive in it. I would do something like, and I did it for a big chain, but I did full service contracts for cooking equipment, refrigeration equipment, HVAC. And the reason for that was I sat down with a trusted vendor and said, we're going to agree to amounts for each piece of equipment, and I'm going to pay you X amount for the year. What that means is if it breaks Monday through Friday throughout the year, you come and take care of it for nothing. And I'm going to bet over the course of the year, that's a good program for me. Why is it a good program for them? Because they may not get the business by doing straight repairs and maintenance because maybe their labor fee or service fee or combined fees are too high. So this gives them an opportunity to own that particular piece of the business. And the other thing it does, it stops my 10 restaurants from calling Jimmy, who's their cousin, to work on the oven. You're already paying a company. You have no other reason to call anybody else. And then what that does is that helps me build my budget going forward for the next year. And I tweak it and adapt to it, but I am very close to what the budget's going to be because it's a fixed charge.
And in your experience there, is that something where the vendor in that scenario would take more ownership because they don't want the emergency repairs just as much as you, because they want to have their schedule planned out where they don't have any surprises, where they're obligated to go out there? And frankly, if they go out there once a year, they're making a killing off of it, and the restaurant, it's
Absolutely.
a win-win all around. You might be paying more than you would have, but it's working fine, and you're going to get more of a longer lifetime of that piece of equipment.
What it does two things for your vendors. It turns them from being a parts changer into a fixer. It is not in their best interest to go out there and say, okay, I think here's the problem. I'll put a part in. If that doesn't work, I'll come back and do another part. And it's a never-ending cycle over and over because they didn't evaluate necessarily all the things that were wrong and fix them. By being on contract, every time they come out, that's less profit. So the odds of them taking the time on the job to thoroughly evaluate what is the problem and get it fixed the first time is good. The other things that a byproduct of that is, while I'm here, and I thought it'd take me 2 hours to fix the fryer, but I fixed it in 20 minutes, I'm going to check all the other stuff and see if it's working so I don't come back. Because you're right. If they don't have to come, they make really, really good money. And the goal is at the end of the year to be profitable for both. Is that what my normal spend would be? Because here's what would happen. At the end of the year, the company would take, had we billed you, this is how much it would have cost for this oven. And here's what we charged you for the contract. And you would work with them because obviously there's some pieces they're upside down on. There's some pieces where they're making a killing because they don't have to come. Well, you adjust those up and down from year to year. So you try to get it as close as you can. You also, people say, well, you could come in there and the vendor could get stuck. Well, what you do when you start that contract is they come in and they evaluate every piece and they give you a list of needs and repairs that need to be done to get the equipment, quote unquote, up to speed. And then they take over the contract. That's their protection.
And something you mentioned earlier that really grabbed my attention was when budgets are really being looked at and evaluated for the following year, and there is a reduction in R&M. You mentioned that PMs are the first ones to go. Why do you think that is? Is it just, and for me, it's hard to comprehend because, being in the space, knowing the importance of preventive maintenance plans and what impact that could have long term. Um, but is that not as much common sense as I like to believe?
Again, most people don't understand it. And when you don't understand it, it's a simple cut. Show me what we get out of it. As a facility manager, can't necessarily show you. I can tell you over time, but I can't particularly tell you at that moment exactly what the savings or piece or what's going to happen. I know what it does to equipment over time, but it's hard to justify what that number is because there's so
Mm.
many variables that go into play. Abuse at the restaurant level, a bad choice in a particular piece of equipment, many different reasons that causes it to fail early or whatever. You can't necessarily equate that 100% to PM or not. So it's really an understanding. And it seems if you're the CFO, here's what we spent for PM. Well, if I cut that, here's how much money I save. Surely I won't have that much in repairs. Well, you might or might not for the first year. Over time, you are, but it's a short term blip, is what they usually look for. It's just an understanding. Unless you're a facility person, most of the time the value of PM is not recognized.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the statistics out there and to quantify what difference that makes, and trying to have that out there, right? Because you mentioned earlier having an example of the fryer where you'd expect 7 years, or that's the typical lifetime. PMs you would expect 10 years. Well, that's a 3 year difference right there. Let's quantify that instead of having it as you'll get longer life cycle. That to me as a business owner doesn't mean much, right? It's like cool, that's great long term, but if you quantify it, similar to your manager example, if you're saying it's going to cost X amount of dollars that you're going to spend 3 years earlier, or in this case, if you're not doing PMs 5 years earlier, here's what's coming out of the bottom line here. That would be interesting to me.
Sure, and you have to look at the whole company as a whole because what can happen is you make a play on the fryers per se. Okay, well we're going to cut the PM for a year and see what happens. Okay, well the fryer ended up lasting longer than what I said. Nobody wants to wait that timeline all the way out. The budget call is budgets have to be turned in 2 weeks. I'm going to cut PM. There's nothing I can give you information wise in 2 weeks, basically, besides me and what history and experience teaches you to necessarily justify keeping versus non keeping. There's no real hard documentation that
And
says.
on that point, that's another great point to bring up is having that relationship with management and having them having the trust with you, and trusting your opinion and your expertise. And you being at the same company for 35 years is certainly an outlier. But for people that are fighting that fight and they're dealing with budget cuts, because we all know what's happened over the last year, and that is going to be front of mind as we look forward. How could they have that conversation if they don't really have that data other than just trust me?
They don't. What? Sure. I mean, what I always did was I fought for the PMs, and I would try to find a way to get the cut another way. I I would have real honest conversations with my regional contractors saying, listen, so you understand this is the amount of money that's out of my budget next year. Okay. Now there's a couple ways you can go. We can go to cheaper vendors, which I am dead set against because it will hurt my restaurants. You can help me get creative and find a way to adjust your pricing that helps continue the volume of business you're getting without, hurting your business. Find another way. Maybe we change the way we buy parts. Maybe we try to find a way to buy parts at a deeper discount. Maybe we stock. Maybe we convince the people we buy the equipment from to stock more equipment. Maybe I work on free freight programs. Used to be a program. You bought 3 pieces at a time, you got a free freight. Okay, well then maybe I'll set up 2 or 3 warehouses across the country and I'll buy pieces 3 at a time and stuff like that. and get some free freight, which will lower my costs. So, as a long term facility person, you always look for, if I'm going to fight for something, I got to bring a different idea to the table. The money's coming out somewhere. I got to figure out where's it best that it doesn't hurt my restaurant. So you work on options. If you're brand new, it's very difficult to do, to one, fight the people above you on what the plan is and how to be creative. You may not know enough. You may not have had enough experience to be creative to
Well,
find
that's
other
why.
ways. But I always wanted to partner with my vendors together and be right up front and say, here's what I'm up against, and I need your
And
help.
that's why people are listening to experts like you through this podcast so they can take that experience, go to their vendors, and use your ideas. So, uh,
And I mean, it doesn't always work. I mean, I've lost a couple of times where PMs got cut, but even then, I fought for, okay, don't cut it total, cut it in half and live with it for a half, and then I'll try to really work really hard to make a case that I can prove on what it, by not doing full PMs, what that cost us in repairs and downtime, so that I could bring it back, because some PM is better than none. You know, um, we split HVAC PMs from filter changes, which save money because PMs are done by HVAC techs. Filter changes can be done by anybody. So you could go to a filter company and all they do is change the filters, take the old ones out, put the new ones in, and you can save some money that way. So we adjusted how we did it. We still did the same amount of work. We just did it with two different vendors. There's no need for me to pay a tech that's making $90 an hour to change filters when I can do it with a guy that does it for 40. Because I'm not asking him to fix the equipment. I'm just asking him to change filters. You can do things like that too, that help.
and so you've provided a couple of examples of things that you might not think of front of mind as you're looking to reduce your R&M spend with the leaking faucets and now talking to getting creative with your vendors. Over the years, what are some other areas that you didn't realize or took you a while to realize that it was a money suck?
I think from an operation standpoint, not understanding vendor charges and what is a service fee. Nobody ever knew what a service fee was. I didn't understand. It's one of the reasons I went to contract, because I took that out of play and it was a non-issue, so I didn't have to explain it 3 times a week on what a service fee is. Like, well, the guy who serviced my equipment was just 1 mile down the road. How's he charging me $100 for a service fee? Well, because the next time he comes, he may be 100 miles away. I mean, do you want to pay per where they are? I mean, that doesn't make sense. We set up an average fee, and you had to explain that all the time to people. What was that? How does it work? How come if I placed a service call at 8 a.m., why are they not at my door? Well, because on their board, they had 10 calls from yesterday that didn't get done. And those calls are to be done first before they come to the new calls that come in. You know, uh, okay, well, every time I put a call in, I'll call it an emergency. No, that's not fair to the vendor. And so, you have to work people through these because they don't see outside their own window, you know. Or the company called and said the guy was going to be on site at 10. It's 10:30. Where is he? Well, he ran into a problem at his stop prior to coming to you. Do you want him just to walk out the door at 10 o'clock and leave the fryer not working? If he was in your restaurant, you want him to stay till he's done. So it's an explanation, again, back to teaching, to help people understand. Part of the job is understand your people and the restaurants and all the things that matter. Also understand what your vendor needs so that you can help communicate that to your restaurant people as well. I think that's one of the biggest keys that you learn over time. It's just the lack of understanding. Those are restaurant managers. Their job is to get the food to the customer, take care of their employees, make sure every meal is good. They have a litany of things that they're responsible for, not facilities. It's item number 20, you know, and that's what my job is to help them. And that's what my team's job is to provide that support and be the voice of reason to help them along, because for most of them, it's not in their wheelhouse at all.
Right. Yeah, I love that. That's great stuff there. And Danny, as we wrap up, I really appreciate you coming on. And once again, I'm going to read the quote that our mutual friend Josh said: "One of the greatest people to set foot in the facilities world, and you haven't let down by any means." So kudos to you. But before I let you get out of here, I'm going to have some quick hitter questions for you that I didn't prep before. So
No problem.
sorry about that, but I'm going to put you on the spot. So who or what had the biggest impact on you and your career?
Two people at Ruby Tuesday that I worked for, Lee Wallace and Dan Bettis. Both were bosses of mine, great leaders, no excuse leaders. And if you look at my profile that I've set up on LinkedIn, I use the term no excuse facility manager. Wrong is wrong, got to fix it, own it, take care of it, manage it. And both those folks taught me. I worked for Sandy Bell, who was the founder of Ruby Tuesday, and I worked for him for 35 years and learned tons: how to manage, how to negotiate, how to never take no for an answer, how to drive a deal. Those things helped me along. And you know, lots of people in my life, but those were my mentors that really kind of taught me how to do business, and hopefully how to do business the right way, because it's very important that when you do business with your vendors, it's a win-win. Not me win, them lose. That doesn't work. Customer's always right. That's junk. That doesn't matter either. It's you have to be a teammate, and you have to be a partner, and you have to communicate. And that's what
That P word is partnership. Absolutely. What was your biggest failure throughout your career with Ruby Tuesday, and what was your biggest takeaway from it?
I think my biggest failure was it probably took me longer than I wanted to get to where I needed to be. I managed hard, and I managed that I owned everything, and I would take my team off the rack. I wouldn't let them get hung out to dry. And that was my way of being a good boss. What I didn't do well was learn to manage properly early enough. I was excited. I wanted to be the best. I wanted my team to be the best, and I thought by just driving and driving and driving those people, that would get me where I needed to be, and it wasn't. It wasn't. You know, I didn't always manage the correct way, and I had to learn that, of how to give my team chances. Let them go to the edge of the cliff. Let them get 1 foot over the ledge before you step in and fix something for them, you know, because some people will just let you, but the other people are never going to learn, as I had to learn, without giving them that opportunity to fall down. And it's okay to fall down. It's always about effort. You know, I never really had a problem when folks would do something wrong. I had a much bigger problem when they didn't do anything. Do something, whatever it is. We can always recover, but make a decision. Don't wait and do. So I think that's a long-winded answer to learning how to be a better manager earlier in my career with people. And I had great people. And why they didn't shoot me 100 times is beyond me. But I think I tried to learn. And most of those folks who have worked for me have really good jobs with other companies, some in the facility world, some in the other pieces of business, but they are very successful. And if anything in the world, I am extremely proud of what they've become.
Yeah, and I use that word failure. I look at it as a positive. I hate the negative connotation of failure. And to me, it's only a truly a failure if you don't learn from it. And you just keep doing the same mistake over and over. And you just hit it on the head with letting your team fail. And that is what you learned what it took to be a good manager is letting them make those mistakes because that's how you learn. And so that is, I love hearing that. And like I said, I hate the
Sure.
negative connotation there because, without that failure, you wouldn't get
If
to
you're
where you're
not
going,
failing,
right?
you're not trying, and nobody is good
Hmm.
enough that every decision they make or are forced to make or whatever turns out right. It doesn't. And I think it's what shapes a lot of people is that you learn. And it was you know, I learned in a much more positive way how to take care of people and be with people. And it's funny because now I'm on the vendor side, you do it all day. And it's a
Hmm.
whole different style than what you do sometimes when you're on the customer side with people. So you have to learn
Yeah.
both.
Yeah, and I read this a long time ago, and I'm not one to remember exactly where I got it from or what book or what author, but it stuck with me where a bad decision is better than no
Correct.
decision, and which I found very encouraging because I make bad decisions all the time, but. Uh, but as long as you're learning from it and you're constantly improving and looking to uh, learn from those mistakes and bad decisions, then it's going to, at the end of the day, make you a better
Absolutely.
person and professional as well. But Danny, certainly appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and best practices that you picked up along the way. Where could people find you if they wanted to reach out
My
to you?
email is dkoontz at windycityaz.com. I'm on LinkedIn. Uh, I do a little podcast kind of thing called FM Corner, where we're doing it for 16. Well, I think we're going to end up doing it for 30 weeks. It's a 5 or 6 minute snippet of lessons I've learned, things that I could hopefully pass on. That sometimes I've learned through trial and error, sometimes I've learned them from other facility managers, and to kind of put that out there to help people along. It's easy; they can listen to it at their own leisure, and if it helps them and gives them an idea of something that will help them in their daily job, that's what it's all about. Because I always use my peer network to learn, and it was my Google was to call the people who did the job for other companies and go, I got a problem and I need your help, and that's what lots of folks help me, and hopefully if I can do that to help someone else, that would be great.
Well, that's going to be in the show notes. And so if you are interested, check out the show notes and I'll have a link there. But Danny, once again, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show and looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you, Griffin, very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast. Make sure to subscribe for future episodes and visit our website, stratumcommunity.com, for more facilities management content.